Today I'd like to discuss compromise. I'd like to discuss some of the tougher situations that raiders will inevitably face. I often get emails about very specific problems pertaining to raid teams. What should I do in this situation, or in this situation? And rather than answering any of them in this video, I'd like to instead share my own rather embarrassing story with you. With any luck, it'll help the more nervous viewers to see that, although there are difficult situations you'll have to deal with in raiding, especially those involving other people, there is always an answer, and there is always a way to grow stronger. So, let's discuss the story of how I stopped healing. It's important to note that I love just about every aspect of World of Warcraft. I love tanking, healing, and damage dealing, and my favourite role often changes depending upon my mood. I joined my guild as a hybrid player, a shaman capable of playing both elemental and restoration to a competitive degree, starting in the Hellfire Citadel patch 6.2. We cleared through heroic in short order, with the raid leader and healing officer, who are the same person, often asking me to switch roles between fights, or even in between pulls, in order to test me out. I proved capable of playing both roles to a high level, and I was accepted into the guild. Up until we started Mythic Progression, I would often change roles on a fight-per-fight basis, and I kept both specs as up-to-date as I could. I was always capable of changing my role based upon what the guild needed. Fast forward past months of Mythic Progression, and some unfortunate health issues on my end, and we reach the meat of this story. With Mythic Archimonde dead and our eyes set upon selling carries and farming the content, our raid leader and healing officer stepped down, leaving to study abroad. This naturally required a change of raid leader, and one of our tanks filled the role very well. However, it also left the role of a healing officer open. Months before this, I was asked to consider whether I'd like to accept the position, but the aforementioned health problems and my own nervousness about the role led to me being somewhat unreliable during this transitionary period, and another player was picked. This was a relief for me, to be honest, as it gave me time to settle back into my schedule and lessened the pressure on me. It was my interactions with our new healing officer, whose role it was to coordinate healers, their cooldowns, and the roster, that sparked this whole story. It's important to remember that our new healing officer had large shoes to fill. The previous officer had been both healing lead and raid leader, and he had done a spectacular job. Naturally, the system was different now. With both a new raid leader and a new healing officer, there was a bit of a disconnect between the healers and the leadership in a way that there hadn't been before. There were growing pains here, and one of the first things done by the new healing officer was to evaluate the state of the healing team. They located 2 problem players, one of whom was myself. I was asked by the healing officer to review my logs in preparation for a discussion about how I can improve. As a player who has never really reviewed logs before, this took me somewhat off guard. And after a short chat, it was revealed that my healing was considered subpar, especially considering that I was spending more time healing than I was damage dealing at that point. After reviewing my logs the best I could, I entered a voice chat with my healing officer, and what followed was embarrassing and stupid of me. The healing officer approached me with the intent to help, and instead I did what most typical players would do, what you would imagine a typical difficult raider would do. I was defensive. I threw excuses. I grew angry. I even rage quit the conversation twice before we were able to have a proper chat about it. Now, there are lots of reasons for this, such as my recent diagnosis, stresses at home and with my work, and the abrupt nature of the evaluation, but none of that is an excuse. I made a mistake. I screwed up. I grew angry when instead I could have learned and grew as a player. We ended the conversation amicably, but I did not handle it particularly well, and I put my place as a raider and a team member in jeopardy because of my own stubbornness and inability to empathize with someone who I thought was wrong. There was an argument to be made for both sides in this discussion, whereas I valued the importance of dealing damage more than my healing officer did, and my healing officer expected more of me whilst I felt that our healing composition was discordant and negatively affected my ability to heal. This all happened a few weeks ago, and after several conversations with my healing officer, some a little heated, and consulting with some theory crafters, the guild, and raid leader, and some other players that I trust, I decided to step down from healing to avoid the stress of the situation altogether. Now, I'd like to look back at this and discuss how I, and hopefully you, can learn from my mistakes. First of all, the most important thing to note here is that during this whole process, I was stressing out. I was frustrated and irritable and prone to lashing out rather than listening, regardless of the situation. This is completely, 100% antithetical to what a raider should be. In an earlier video, we discussed what makes a mythic raider, and we covered that they should be a member of a team, they should go above and beyond, they should be knowledgeable, helpful, analytical, and determined. I was determined, but not to be helpful or a member of a team. I was determined to be right. I was attempting to protect my own pride from being injured by someone who was criticizing me. Taking criticism is never easy, but it's something that you need to consider as a raider, and really as a player of the game and as a person in life. People are going to criticize you. It's important to remember that even when a member of your team is criticizing you, they are likely doing so for the betterment of the team, to make it stronger. Their criticism may be flawed, and they may be looking at things from the wrong angle, but they are likely trying to make the team stronger, and responding by lashing out is never the answer. Now, sometimes people will criticize you for no reason other than to criticize you, but that's not the situation I'm talking about here. I'm talking about someone who criticizes you because they want you, and through extension, the team, to improve. If you want to be an effective raider, work with your team, even when they are criticizing you. Do all you can to improve. Sometimes, especially as a mythic raider, it can be very easy to forget that there is always room for improvement. You can be literally the best player in the world and get #1 passes and ranks using World of Logs. There is always room for improvement. Work with your team to better yourself, and to better them. Okay, so we can agree that when you get criticized, you should do your best to look past your own pride, your own ego, and to work with others to improve yourself. Now I want to discuss compromising, specifically with a point of contention between me and my healing officer, dealing damage as a healer. My first ever Tuskeh's tip was to point out that, in my opinion, a healer should be willing to deal damage during downtime so that they are contributing to the team. When I was healing, I was occasionally allowing other members of the healing team, especially those who couldn't deal damage as well as I could, to beat me to healing others, so that I could deal damage instead. This wasn't an issue in my eyes, but to my healing officer, it certainly was. I was told that if I wanted to deal damage, I should be a damage dealer, not a healer. This statement is what sparked most of the argument that I mentioned earlier, and it's important to note that both of our positions are right and wrong. From my point of view, dealing damage is important, no matter the role, as the quicker a boss dies, the easier it is on every member of the team. From my healing officer's point of view, dealing damage at the expense of the health of the raid is a bad thing, and not putting everything I had into keeping the raid as topped off as possible was a mistake. I was doing the same amount or even less damage than other healers in some situations. Now, we were both right. Whilst dealing damage was important, my healing officer pointed out several instances where, had I worked more on my healing, increased throughput would have saved lives. I did argue this point, and I could have argued it for hours, sometimes I honestly still want to, but after speaking with players that both agree and disagree with me, I definitely feel that my decision to step away was for the best. This was a situation where I fundamentally disagreed with my healing officer, and, as we had a strong composition of healers with some on reserve, including some fresh blood, rather than continue to argue the point, I decided to do what I felt was best for me. I'd like to credit a friend and colleague, Patrick, for his aid here. Rather than argue my point for the sake of being right, I took my own advice, with some help, to focus on what I found the most fun. Rather than creating tension in the raid team by being unhappy with my situation, I changed it. Now that I've been a pure damage dealer for a few weeks, I am extremely happy. I've been more relaxed, healthier, happier, and more pleasant to be around. It's made my work better. The stresses of life, while still present, are lessened by raiding, rather than exacerbated by it like it was before. This decision has turned the last few weeks into better, happier times for me, and I wanted to tell you this story because I want to help. If you ever find yourself in a situation similar to mine, where you find yourself under criticism, or you fundamentally disagree with someone, then here are the steps that I feel would help. First of all, determine if changing the situation will help you. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. For instance, if the healing team had required me just saying, well, I'm not healing anymore, would have hurt the team rather than benefited it. But remember, this is a game, and playing it for fun is, in my humble opinion, the best way of playing it. Secondly, take some time to speak with someone outside of the situation. Try to present the situation as objectively as you can, without inserting your own opinion into it. Other players can really help here. Don't suffer alone. Thirdly, if you disagree with someone, consider just not arguing with them. Now this might seem ridiculous, especially on the internet, but it's important to remember that deciding not to argue with someone is not weakness. It's not timidness. Deciding not to make a situation worse is the sign of a reasonable and rational mind. Always keep the team in mind here. Will arguing with someone and building a gulf between you make the team stronger? Probably not. Of course, every situation is different. And yes, there are people out there who are just assholes, who will criticize you for any reason and who are just nasty. But most people are not like that, at least in my humble opinion. And when it comes to the more difficult situations, hopefully this video will help. Try your best to be humble and thoughtful and kind, even when others are criticizing you, or when you feel like you can't be. Always try. Trying to be kind is a great way to handle things. I by no means think that I handled this situation well, and hindsight is always 20/20. I can't promise myself that this won't happen again, but I can, and intend to, use this story as a reminder of how easily I can screw things up. I like to think I'm a fairly calm and fairly thoughtful person, but this is an example where I was not. But again, try to look at things from an optimistic perspective. This story could easily showcase how I screwed up, how an argument flared over something silly. Or it could showcase the tremendous patience and kindness of my healing officer, who had an angry, irritable Englishman thrust at them, ranting and arguing and being generally difficult to work with. It showcases the kindness and willingness to listen of those that I spoke to, of the support they gave me in making my decision. It shows the kindness and willingness to work with me to change the roster a little bit so that I could be a pure damage dealer. This may all seem like hogwash to some people, but although this is just a game, and it's not real, the people that you play with, that you build relationships with, and that you make friends with, they are most certainly real, and they are definitely worth discussing. Thank you very much for watching, and I wish you the best of luck in the world of Warcraft.